I just wanted to say he was my former director of graduate studies at the University of Virginia and inspired me, so I had to get that in there. We have a couple housekeeping matters. Please mute your cell phones, and if you would, since we are being televised on the Pentagon channel, if you would hide or put away your badges. I will not take up valuable time from our speaker. I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Clarence Johnson, the Director of the Diversity Management and Equal Employment Opportunity Office. Mr. Johnson.
Welcome and thank you for taking time to join us as we commemorate the 150th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. This event is one of many which will be held throughout February as we celebrate African American History Month. And this year's theme, Crossroads to Equality and Freedom, the Emancipation Proclamation and the March on Washington. Now, before we begin, I want to acknowledge the leadership of Ms. Mann in her office, Chief Historian in the Office of Secretary of Defense, and a very knowledgeable team for their efforts in organizing this event, and so many others that throughout the year, their efforts to preserve and protect the history of the great Department of Defense for future generations. All of you taking time to join us today are leaders. I applaud your commitment to a diversified workforce and the effort you take to support diversity and inclusion in the Department of Defense. To all those in the audience today, as well as those watching via the Pentagon channel, I thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to recognize such an important topic. Last but certainly not least, I want to extend my appreciation to Dr. Edward Ayers for what I know will be a dynamic discussion about the importance of the Emancipation Proclamation, its impact on the Civil War and beyond. Not only is Dr. Ayers the president of the University of Richmond and an accomplished scholar specializing in the antebellum South, he has served as a lecturer for both the Smithsonian Museum for American History and the National Endowment for the Humanities, where discussions have been broadcast to millions on national television. Dr. Ayers, you honor us with your presence. This department's commitment to diversity and inclusion is evident as we salute the great strides we made as a society to ensure all people, regardless of race, gender, or creed, are respected, valued, and treated equally. Now, this month, we celebrate and commemorate the service of African Americans. As they looked at America's rich history, and I'm going to paraphrase a past Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Equal Opportunity, the founders of African American History Month observance, they were not purporting less of George Washington, the father of our country, first in the war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen. Rather, the founders just wanted to highlight the service of Crispus Attucks, the first American to be killed in the Boston Massacre, and the 5,000 black warriors who fought in the American Revolution so that we could have a father of our country. And they didn't want less recognition for Abraham Lincoln, of course, the signer of the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed the slaves. They just wanted a little more recognition for the 180,000 black warriors who fought in the Civil War, and the 35,000 of them who died to prove to an uncaring nation that they were entitled to citizenship and to freedom. Black History Month founders' intent was not to belittle the accomplishments of Pershing, of Bradley, of Arnold, those of our great military pioneers. They just felt it important to spotlight the service, the character, indeed the accomplishments of the Buffalo Soldiers, the Tuskegee Airmen, and the Montford Point Marines who fought valiantly on two fronts, some fighting for this nation even as its slaves. Now, African Americans, of course, continue to serve with great honor and valor in defense of our nation. They played an integral role providing valuable contributions in all sectors of national defense. Their accomplishments, their victories, are important milestones in our proud military heritage. Their courage, their conviction, their excellence, and achievement have produced great American leaders like General Daniel Chapman James, General Roscoe Robinson, Vice Admiral Samuel Gravely Jr., Lieutenant General Frank Peterson, General Colin Powell, Vice Admiral Michelle Howard, and many others. And certainly, our all-volunteer force of today is representative of the nation it defends. Right now, our military workforce has grown to about 35% minorities and 15% women, with minorities comprising about 29% of our civilian workforce and women over a third of our civilian workforce. Now, in deference to African Americans, since this is African American History Month, it's important to note that African Americans make up about 16.8% of our active duty force of 1.4 million, and 15% of our 800,000 or so person civilian workforce. And you know our civilian workforce serve our nation in a variety of critical capacities. Now, according to the latest census numbers, 13.6% of the U.S. population is made up of African Americans. That means the representation of African Americans in our armed forces and our civilian workforce is higher than that in the U.S. population. Now, few would argue that though our military force is the most effective, the most lethal force this nation has ever fielded, few would argue against that. Certainly a high-quality force has made us strong, but I will submit to you a high-quality, diverse force has made us stronger. And while the Emancipation Proclamation helped set the stage for our modern, all-inclusive armed force, our all-volunteer force continues to succeed because it operates within an environment of equity, dignity, and respect, where the policies and practices maximize the productive capacity of each military member and civilian member. But it is up to each of us to uphold those policies and practices to ensure we continue to create an environment where people from all walks of life can indeed thrive. You see, we believe that diverse backgrounds and experiences bring inherently different outlooks and ways of thinking, which are the keys to innovation in organizations. We gain a strategic advantage by leveraging the diversity of all members and creating an inclusive environment in which each member is valued and encouraged to provide ideas critical to innovation, to optimization, and to organizational mission success. Secretary Panetta eloquently summed it up recently when he said, as DOD made the decision to expand the combat role of women. Secretary said, if members of our military can meet the qualifications for a job, then they should have the right to serve regardless of creed, color, gender, or sexual orientation. I close by again stating the theme of African American History Month, Crossroads to Equality and Freedom, the Emancipation Proclamation, and the March on Washington. I would submit to you that the Emancipation Proclamation enhanced America's freedom. And I give you this quote. The quote is, I believe we are here on the planet Earth to live, grow up, and do what we can to make this world a better place for all people to enjoy freedom. Now, this is a quote from Ms. Rosa Parks, who, if still living, would be celebrating her 100th birthday today, February 4, 2013. Ms. Parks is called by many the First Lady of the Civil Rights Movement, as she was a woman who in December 1955 refused to give up her seat on a public bus to a white man. And for that, Ms. Parks was arrested, triggering the Montgomery bus boycott and later the March on Washington. If the Emancipation Proclamation enhanced America's freedom, as I said earlier, the March on Washington 50 years ago this year enhanced America's human capital capacity. Let me now take this opportunity to formally introduce our guest speaker. Prior to his appointment as the president of the University of Richmond, Dr. Edward L. Ayers taught at the University of Virginia and served as the Buckner W. Clay Dean of the College and Graduate School of Arts and Science. Dr. Ayers is a noted author who has written and edited 12 books on the history of the American South. He has received awards from the American Historical Association and Columbia University for one of his books, while yet another was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award. Dr. Ayers is also an editor for the Papers of Abraham Lincoln and is a co-host of Backstory, which is a weekly radio show exploring the historical roots of contemporary issues. Please join us in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Edward Ayers.
Thank you. It's great to see everybody, and I've actually tried to live up to the eloquence of that introduction. The talk that I'm going to give is really about the context of the Emancipation Proclamation, and in some ways acknowledging the miracle of its existence. Because I think in 1860, if you'd ask people, what do you think the odds are of the largest and most powerful system of slavery in the modern world being gone in 5 years? I don't think anybody would have given you very good odds on that, whether it's Frederick Douglass or a slaveholder or an enslaved person herself. It simply did not seem possible that a system had been in place for centuries that held in bondage 4 million people and that had never been stronger or more entrenched or more important to the nations and the world's economy could go away that quickly. And if you told people that 2 years after that, men would be voting who had been slaves a few years earlier, no one would have believed that. And if you told people that 200,000 African-American men would be soldiers and sailors only 3 years after the election of 1860, fighting for the United States and the end of slavery, nobody would have believed that. The problem being a historian, or a problem of living with a history, is that we all know how it turned out. And it's easy to become numb to the sheer impossibility of that. We need to restore a sense of the awe and the surprise that should surround the pivotal event of our history. But we've kind of domesticated it. We've kind of gotten used to it. We've sort of put it behind glass and thought, well, of course, it was only a matter of time until this great nation would rise up against slavery. Of course, it was only a matter of time that we would settle forever the question of secession. But those things were certainly in doubt at every step of the way. So one of the things I really want to do is we're going to look at this through several perspectives today and try to figure out something that we're still wrestling with. Where did freedom come from? Now, historians, you may or may not be surprised to know, disagree about exactly what the answer might be to that. Some people think that you see it in the new Lincoln movie. How many people have seen the Lincoln movie, by the way? A high ratio. And, you know, I think it does an excellent job of focusing. It's only 4 pages out of Doris Kearns Goodwin's book. So I tell young people, imagine if that's 4 pages, imagine what the Civil War would look like if it were a movie, if you were including everybody in the story. And that does focus on a critical moment when the 13th Amendment comes into passing. But we all know a lot had happened before that. Now, the map I have up on the floor, on the screen, is begin to start our story. Where did freedom come from? And I will tell you my theme right now is that it was the product of many hands. Some who did it unintentionally, and some people who risked their lives to undo the chains of slavery. So let's start with the people who did not intend for this to be the outcome, but who played a critical role. You see the election of 1860 there. The critical thing is that it was divided into 4. And the yellow counties are the critical ones. And those of you who know your demography will recognize that in many ways those are the most heavily African-American counties in the South. And that's because the largest slaveholders said, and I don't know if I need to touch the keyboard periodically to make it stay alive, or well, whatever will be required. He's got it to do that. And but it will. I'm confident it's going to appear right behind me any minute now. So those slaveholders say, look, the Constitution says that I have the right to have slaves. And Abraham Lincoln acknowledges that he has no right to touch slavery where it is. I am not really eager to disrupt that. But in the purple counties, the 3/4 of white Southerners who did not own slaves said, I want to make sure that the prospect of advancement is not sealed off. So you have one paradox right off the bat, is that the whole South, the whole white South, is committed to slavery, but ironically, the people who already have the greatest investment in it want to protect what they have. And they say, all we need is a 13th Amendment to the Constitution that guarantees slavery in perpetuity and says that the government can never change it. There's no sectional crisis. They talked about that seriously. It did not come to pass. But that was the condition. So the Constitutional Union Party wanted to keep the Union and the Constitution. Abraham Lincoln, representing this brand new red party up there, and we need to realize that this is only 5 or 6 years old by 1860, as if Ross Perot had succeeded in the next election and had won, to give you a sense for some of the more senior members of the audience who know what I'm talking about. But they said, look, we just want to contain slavery so it cannot expand. And because we think that slavery by itself is an inefficient as well as inhumane labor system that cannot survive. We think if it's sealed off and it's not allowed to drag the United States into war in Cuba or into Central America, that it will die of its own accord in about 5 generations. A little math would suggest that would be about 1965. Okay? So that's kind of the Republican Party saying we cannot possibly dislodge slavery here it is, but we can stop it from spreading, and that's what the Republican Party is all about. So white Southerners played critical roles in helping to bring the end of slavery by doing a couple of things. One, they said, I don't care what the Republicans say, they're an abolitionist party. They want to end slavery. And the African Americans among whom they lived said, well, that's interesting. If we ever get a chance to help them out, we shall. The other thing the white Southerners did is right after this election, they looked and said, I don't see any red counties in the South.